Hello. I said hello. Thank you so much for being here. We are very excited to talk about actually something that just came up in the last session. I was so glad that you asked that question. We are here to talk about evolving the role of HR from that people champion or that people data expert into that business strategist, that real commercial mindset. And so your question really gets to the heart of many of the things that we're going to be talking about, building off of Lou's fantastic introduction to the idea of leading with influence. So to kick us off, I'd like to have my lovely co-panelists do a bit of introduction to themselves. So Sophie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. I've been in the people space for about a decade now. Feels like a little bit too long for me. I've also kind of jumped from recruitment to people to operations most recently, and I work with early stage startups and try and do my best and help them grow into better companies.
James?
Hi, I'm James. I'm the founder of Talent Point, an embedded talent consultancy, and of Futurist. My learnings today, I've got 20 years now in the people space. I've always focused on talent acquisition. I've loved it. I've loved seeing the impact a really good TA team can have on a business. It was my dealings with chief people officers through Talent Point, in fact, which is where Futurist was formed. And it was formed in the genesis of the fact that you all work really hard to get a seat at the top table. And when you get to that top table, you realize it's really lonely and the buck stops with you. So the whole genesis was, is there a space here for a network which chief people officers, VC-backed companies can get together to build friendships and be with a view of solving some of the common challenges that world presents themselves. So to be really, really clear, I am not a chief people officer. I'm coming here today more with my learnings from being a fly on the wall at the dinners we put on and the events we hold.
And I'm Sarah Reynolds. My pronouns are they and them. I'm also not a chief people officer, for the record, although I am a DEI consultant and I write and speak widely about things like pay equity, LGBTQIA+ inclusion, transition at work, which is a topic close to my heart, and many, many more things. So we're going to jump right in because I think we have some really great topics to cover today. The first is, we talk about leading with influence, and I think you know that it's very difficult to be influential if you don't have a foundation of trust. And oftentimes getting to that top table, as you say, right, requires you to build trust with some maybe difficult personalities. I'm in the C-suite. I'm allowed to make fun of myself.
Yeah.
That's right. And oftentimes it also means overcoming that age-old stereotype that HR is maybe just a people person, or you're just the people data person in maybe the modern iteration of HR. So I'm kind of interested to hear from both of you in the work that you've done and the work obviously that you do with the Futurist group. When you think about how do you convince an executive that you are a trusted partner, that you are really that strategic thinker, that you are more than just the people person. How do you maybe start that conversation? Sophie, I'll start with you.
You start by really reinforcing that you spend a lot of time. Well, I think the first things first is to go into a business and really spend your time, not in onboarding yourself to get to know the people, but actually get to know the business. What are they there for? What are your leaders there for? What are your C-suite trying to solve? What are the business problems? I think very often HR folks go into a company and try and do the one-to-ones to get to know each other, because it's about trying to understand the relationship. You want to get on their good books, and so that you feel like you can influence them longer term. But what I have found really helpful is to really kind of switch on that business mindset and to really understand what is the business here to do, to solve an industry problem, what is the product here to solve, and at the same time, why are these people hired, right? Everyone's got a justification of why they exist. And if you do that really well, you'll understand the business so much more. And that way, when you're part of that table, you're already part of the conversation. You don't have to fight for that space anymore. So that's what I found really helpful.
James, we've talked a couple of times about, you see this role happening in the Futurist community where people need to shift into being commercially minded. Like, what does that look like to you?
So we ran a survey middle of last year, so about 500 members. So think 500 members, senior people leaders, CPO, VC, PE world. And there was around about a 65% response rate, which highlighted one of the key frustrations they were having was getting that voice heard at board. Despite being bored or at that level, it was still getting their voice heard. So we had a round table. So I'm sat there listening to these people. And the idea was to come and say, look, how do perhaps more seasoned people here not have this issue, whilst perhaps more first-time VPs, CPOs are having this problem? And the reality is they don't see themselves as any different from the C-suite leader. They are a business leader. And they're responsible for driving the strategy. The manner in which they communicate and the manner in which they leverage the data varies. So we've all got the same data sets, but the manner in which you communicate with a CMO is very different to that of a CEO. Definitely very different to that of a CTO and a CFO. So it's kind of like the data's all there, but how do you dress it up in context that's going to really appease that particular person? That was one of the learnings. And the second learning was that they're always one foot ahead. So if you think about the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, it's been pretty tough and companies have had to pivot continually. What they're not looking for from the people space is reaction. They're looking for someone who's proactively in place. And that kind of leads to what we were talking about earlier today about sort of workforce planning and how you go about being as agile as possible with that. If you're always on the back foot, you're going to be seen as a back office function, a support function. You've got to be driving the conversation. You've got to be in the front foot. You've got to have control. Otherwise, it'll be a struggle to get that voice heard. That's what I learned. I can't do it, but that's what I heard.
It's also about learning the personalities, right? And the people across the table. You might have a chief product officer, a fellow CPO, but their P, right, in their acronym, it's really different from what you do, and what they care about is so different from maybe what you care about or what you think about. How do you maybe coach folks who have that question to say, okay, how do I actually really learn the difference between maybe a chief product officer and a chief technology officer? Or how do I learn the difference between ARR and ACV and EBITDA?
That's a hard one for me, Sarah. I guess it comes down to you investing time and understanding what are their goals. So if there's a joint set of initiatives across the organization that's going to achieve the final success, you need to understand what is their particular role and therefore their particular interest in that set. And therefore make sure that before every meeting, at board, when it may be, that you're reinforcing and getting the appropriate data dressed in a way which you know is going to support them in achieving that initiative.
Yeah. Execs, boards, right, we're often characterized as being trained to speak this language of data. Every idea has to be backed up with data. Every decision has to be data driven. There's the dreaded business case where you have to use data to prove why your idea, which sounds so rational and obvious on paper, is required. I don't know if anybody in the room has ever faced the question but if my employees are more engaged, what do I get out of that? Why should I care, right? Why does that matter to me? And I think a couple of folks earlier talked a little bit about, interpreting the data for folks and not just maybe using data for data's sake, but really digging into the data and really using the data to tell an influential story. So I'm curious about, this idea of insights and proof points. Sophie, can you maybe share an example, a real world example of how you've used data to actually maybe influence a business decision?
Yeah, so a recent example is we were looking at growing out our tech team. And usually when you hear about growing out the tech team, that means hiring more people into the headcount space. And so normally you would kind of look at, okay, this is X amount of people I need, this is how much they're going to cost me from a benchmark perspective, times how much, and this is budget, right? But more importantly, it's actually understanding where can I find the people, where can I find the talent that can actually push my features and my projects out in a shorter amount of time, and that means better products out to my customers. I can grow the ARR quicker. And then also at the same time, without having to downsize the workforce, we can also have some cost savings here. So it's really understanding that cost efficiency more so than cost savings or cross-growing, which I think a lot of the times when we're in the HR space, we forget about that because we look at it as a headcount thing, right? And so what we've done recently in Paydoc is we decided that let's just call it front and foremost, it's a second tech hub. We've already got a bunch of people out in Portugal because it's the thing now to do. Let's go and figure out a second hub that is economical for us, We know that there's a congestion of talent that is actually suitable for us. We're in the payment system. We know that they're not scattered everywhere, let's be really honest. And that's part of also really getting to understand, and this is how we partner, right? Myself in my role to partner with my CTO to really understand what does he need. It's most of the time when you get into the gist of it, it's often not how many bums on the seat. It's what is the value the team is going to bring. So when you package them all together, we decided that we found a tech hub that is not just economical. We know for a fact that there are going to be an abundance of talent that probably we're also going to look at actually upskilling them to become more tech leads. And therefore, we can then give the space for our current employees and our current teams to also grow. So when you do it that way, you feel like you're actually targeting each and every common problem that the company is trying to resolve in one go, one strategy.
So it's all about using, in this case, like labor market data, and like you got to look at the availability of talent, not just, sort of like average salaries in the region. You got to communicate, not just about number of people, but also about, what skills do they need? What benefit does this have for the internal team around mobility, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's the workforce planning data. And then also really, when we got into the understanding and partnering with the engineering team, we also understood their productivity data, right? Sometimes different time scale, different time zones also impact that. We also know for a fact that this is the X amount of time for us to actually achieve a certain feature that gets pushed out to the customers. So when we do that, you collate all of this data and then actually make the commercial sense to it.
James, not every organization goes through this sort of evolution where they're, thinking about opening a new office or a new center of excellence or a new tech hub. But I know you also specialize at Talent Point in, hiring and in talent acquisition consulting. TA is one of those places that it's like a funnel, right? For anybody who's marketing focused or works with marketers in the room, we love a funnel. But recruiting is like a funnel, right? How do you leverage or coach folks to leverage maybe that TA data that is more readily available in something like a recruiting funnel?
I think it's, I'm thinking about what you're talking about now. I think there's a growing trend right now in the PE world about we need to grow organizations with cost neutrality in mind to a certain degree. So a lot of HR leaders are having to go and look at lower cost regions in order to go and scale affordably. The key to the data we're looking at is going to be available in some of the free things like LinkedIn. That's obviously always there, but that tells only one side of the story. You want to think about the local motivations of talent in that key region. You want to think about availability of talent. You want to think about tax implications, criminality, location of office. There's a whole host of data you can start thinking about when looking to sort of build out those tech hubs. I think from an HR leader point of view, though, I totally get where you're coming from, Sophie, but I also think there's a point whereby if you're having those conversations at board, it's probably worth the chief people officer driving that agenda and bring it towards the CTO more than the CTO coming to the CPO to ask support in that. And that, again, for me, is more about sort of driving that influence and having that say and taking the command so that you're thinking, crikey, this person really is bringing some value to the organization here and thinking commercially about how we go about doing that.
Yeah, I was hanging out with our customer advisory board yesterday, and we were talking a lot about workforce planning and the different sort of like tips and techniques that people had. Also, some of the pitfalls of workforce planning. And we found maybe like a really obvious sort of like tip or something that we had seen go wrong in workforce planning. And it was like, well, I understand that, time to hire in certain regions is different, like check plus business planning, we got it, right? But maybe what we forgot when we built out this beautiful spreadsheet or this beautiful workforce plan was that not only is time to hire in different regions different, but also the average notice period is different. And the average, that's the seasonality in these regions are different. People hang around, maybe until April to get a bonus, or they're not going to change jobs during the typical festive season, right? There were all of these sort of like inputs into this idea of workforce planning that the leaders were sharing that, it was really through almost like trial and error. It was really through, even somebody just coming and opening the door and saying like, hey, HR, or hey, people team, like, how do I, do you know something that I don't know about this workforce planning thing that I should keep in mind as I go through, that was helping them maybe uncover some like new ways of thinking. But I know, Sophie, when we were chatting for the early call, we started talking about the idea of like scenario planning in workforce planning, which is very, very trendy right now. The world is changing. It's this VUCA, environment all the time. You don't know what's going to happen. Economy go up, economy go down, economy flat, whatever. But you shared, unlike a lot of leaders who do, infinite scenario plans and they try and make like a perfect plan on paper that's going to be like, taking into account every possible thing that could happen. You actually don't necessarily always recommend that. Can you maybe share a little bit with us?
I think it's the startup DNA in me. It's the execution power. It's the go, go, go constantly, because I've also seen lots of frustrations where you're just sitting down there and trying to plan for perfect scenarios and the world's never perfect. So at the end of the day, you kind of feel like you're failing and doing something that is supposed to be really less complex than it needs to be. So while I do and encourage the business to do scenario planning, but we try and truncate the scenario planning into something a lot less complex. And that means, we know for a fact that this is some X amount of stuff that we actually need to get done. And this is the time that has been given, especially for a B2B business like ours. A lot of the times the work that we need to do is actually dictated by the contracts that we sign with our customers. And so therefore we can reverse engineer that and then actually plan that ahead of time. And so when we do that, we don't do scenarios as in, okay, this is a floating scenario. We call that a big fat floating scenario, or sometimes internally we call it a balloon scenario. And that means that this is the most ideal situation where this is our whole funnel pipeline and we are going to hit all of this and it's jackpot and we go for it. But at the same time, we also have to take into consideration our runway and our funding situation. And so not necessarily a big fan of very perfect scenario planning, but we do small parts of it. But our workforce planning in reality in Paydoc is a live project. It just keeps going. And this is part of the role of, being part of the table as a HR person, is to always understand what is going on in the business. So for example, like me, I do spend my days digging deep into our commercial agreements because I need to understand what we've promised our customers. And that helps.
Yeah. I in that same conversation with our friends at the customer advisory board, it was really interesting to hear people comment like, the best laid plans, right? You make a plan, and the minute you make a plan, the forecast is different than the plan. We recently acquired, many of you might know, an FP&A solution called Mosaic out of California here at HiBob. And one of the things that we were chatting about was the incredible opportunity that we have to really bring like HR and finance closer together through a process like workforce planning to make it really a better feedback loop, to say like, okay, we know that a plan is out of date the minute that it's published. So how do we actually influence and learn from that and really like maybe even reset the plan as we go along to be able to track our progress?
Yeah.
An old mentor of mine, switching gears, once told me that as an executive, the thing that you had to get comfortable with was disagreeing with your CEO. And I am curious, team, because, in something like an environment focused on cost efficiency, or in an environment focused on even maybe cost cutting, right? Oftentimes the people leader does need to play a dual role of this commercially minded, executive, right? Who understands why maybe my PE firm is pushing for this measure, or my board is asking these questions, but also serves as that people champion or that advocate for your people first culture, right? Your people proud culture. So I'm curious from your side, how do you maybe strike that balance artfully, or how do you artfully disagree with someone like a CEO when you come up against some of these like really weighty, emotional topics that get wrapped into cost cutting? James, I'll maybe start with you.
From my side, I guess it comes down to literally if you're wrong, don't argue back. But if you fundamentally think that you've got a point to make, one would assume that's not based on gut, that's based on what the data's telling you. So again, it comes back to what's the data saying? Why does that make sense to you? And how can you position that to ensure that makes sense to them? And that will come down to the impact it's going to have on the business imperatives or strategy at that particular time. But a hard one to do.
What is the role maybe of like a chief people officer who's nailing it in a cost-cutting environment? Is it more to be the person who says, yes, I understand, to the CEO or to the board? Or is it more of that role of that people advocate to say, no, our values dictate that we treat people, a certain way?
I think it depends how tight things are. If things are super tight and you just got to cut, then there's not much you can do, but you have to cut. That's just the runway's not there for it. I think otherwise you should be protecting everything that you've built up in that organization, given that the business fundamentally are the people which you employ. And every initiative you put in place has got a role in helping that business achieve its final outcome. And if you don't have that voice and you don't push back, it's going to be trashed. So it comes down to you making sure that you find a way of positioning the data, which you know for a fact will protect the business, the people, and the final business outcomes.
Sophie?
Yeah. I mean, the days I have to say no to a CEO, it's probably, I have realized that the more I say no to a CEO, they're actually probably a better CEO for me to work with. And I do enjoy that. I think healthily, one of the things I found really helpful is to really understand, is this an emotional reaction or is this a strategic reaction? What is causing this question to pop up, and really kind of get into the gist of understanding where this is coming from. Because most of the time, the knee-jerk reaction is, we hit the red line, something needs to change, and the easiest way to change this is to give someone or let someone else do that dirty work. Most of the time, that's me, right? Because it's people. But then when you argue that we have to put people first, but at the end of the day, we don't have a business after, so everyone is being sacrificed at the same time. You gotta find that balance. So what I found really helpful is to really understand where this is coming from. Why do we need to do this? And more importantly also, being part of the table isn't just showing up when you feel like you need to, it's consistently showing up. Because you know the business so well that you know exactly what is coming up already. So most of the time I go, guys, I know this is all really exciting. We got to pump the brakes a little bit here because we've got a whole load of people that we need to look after before this happens. And I think that takes rigor. That takes a lot of time spent in understanding the business. But more importantly, also, that can only be done if you've built a really good and trusting relationship with your C-suite. Because then you wouldn't be seen as the person that's just pushing back for the sake of it, right? We all love the people that we bring in and we hire and we want to work consistently with. But sometimes there are going to be bad days that you'll have to say no to it.
Yeah. Do you also think about a chief people officer friend of mine said to me recently, I had to look inward and think about what are the hills I'm willing to die on? Like, I can't win every argument. I can't even take on every argument because I don't want the reputation of being the department of no or the person who is only vocal when they're pushing back, right? And she said, one of the things that really helped her in that when do I say no, especially to someone like her CEO, was to think about, is this one of the things that I hold dear? Like, is this the core of, in her case, who I am or who the company is to its values that we need to respect? Or is this something where we can find maybe a compromise position? Do you find that in your world, it's equally helpful to maybe look inward at yourself as it is to try and understand why you're getting the reaction across the table?
1,000%. And I need to know that, friend, because that's exactly the thing I ask myself. Is this the hill I want to die on, or is it worth it? Some days it's definitely not worth it, and you tend to get yourself in a position where you push your boundaries a little bit further, but over time, you learn what the trade-offs are. Some are small wins, some are much bigger wins that are going to actually bring a bigger impact. And some things it's okay to just let go, just because I've also come to a point in my career that I don't let my ego get in the way anymore. So sometimes it's like, okay, if you think this is right, maybe time will tell that you are wrong. But for now, we'll get it done for now.
Peter Drucker famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I'm curious for you folks, how do you maybe see companies embracing that idea in this modern era where we are talking about, hard topics like, cost cutting or cost efficiency? Do you see folks leaning in to the idea that, hey, culture is equally as important and it does eat strategy for breakfast, and in fact that people data is just as valuable as that business data? Or do you see folks maybe taking a step back? Sophie, I'll start with you.
I think more recently than older times, I think culture is really at the forefront of how we do businesses right now. Not just because it's the topic you want to be known for. When you're a CEO, you're up on the stage and you talk about culture, you talk about people first, but most of the time you don't practice it. But I think it's getting a lot more recognition that leaders essentially want to just be good leaders. They want to be known for the right things. They don't want to be known for that bulldozer that comes in and then kind of wipes everything clean.
Scandal.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody really wants to be that kind of person anymore. It's not a nice thing to be known for. So I'm starting to really see good leaders turn themselves around and just want to do the right thing by people, because this is how you create leadership, and not just managers.
Yeah. James?
I love that phrase. I love it. And the reason I love it is because it's the one thing that I've noticed from the events we put on, that it's kind of like the CPOs take that as being their mantra. So if we know that we can have these conversations in this room here and we can agree a strategy, but the minute we leave this room, if it's not positioned correctly, it's just got to fall flat. The culture will eat it up. I kind of see it as being the role to take that and defend it and push it out to the wider organisation, and to make sure that every single leader in the organisation is following suit with regards to it.
Yeah.
I think it's a mantra of a CPO.
Yeah, for sure. We've been trying to distill this idea here at HiBob into what we believe about, the future of work, about people centricity in businesses, about the current moment. And we've come up with this phrase, like, it's not just that you're a people first organization, you are a people proud organization. And you know that when you empower your people, you actually power your business. For many of us, our people truly are the thing that is going to make us innovative and strategic and creative, and all of those great, like, durable human skills, right, that are inherent to people. So I wanted to maybe close out by asking you both, like, what does it mean to be people proud to you, James?
As a business leader, I would say if we put the right systems, tooling, people in place in our organisations, that ensures that they are well motivated, well trained, well performant, enjoying, and therefore proud that they represent the work they do, then that's what it would mean to me.
Sophie?
Treat people the way you want to be treated.
Ah,
at any level, any seniority, any role you play, whether or not you're a leader, you're an IC, you're a manager, however it is, and any time in your journey in your career. I think building sustainable businesses is exactly that. It's to give people the freedom and the autonomy to do the work that they are very, very good at. And when their time has struck out and it's not for them anymore, just be really honest why it's not working out. And I think that's the future of work, because we've got so many choices to actually work for better companies than not now.
Yeah, trust the people you hire. Trust that those people will make you proud as an organization. That's a great ending point. We do have some time for questions from the audience. So I would love, I think the team is in the back with microphones, if you have questions for James or Sophie on any of these topics. Quiet crowd today. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Lucy again. Hi. My question is really about what experience you've had and how you overcome, particularly with finance leaders, a kind of a short-term vision, particularly in kind of an unstable economic situation, or if there's a lot of change going on. Often, in my experience, the financial leaders kind of equate operating expenditure or being efficient with cutting costs. And they don't invest in the same way that they might do if you're in manufacturing machinery or in your operating structure or whatever. How have you overcome that kind of bias towards that short-term thinking rather than long-term investment?
What a pain, isn't it? Yeah. CFO. And you're in Spendesk too, I heard you said. Yeah. That's a good one. Some of my best partners in companies are actually CFOs, so I've learned from a long time ago that they have to be my best friend from day one. How that works is I really try and understand their day-to-day, what are their worries, and at the same time, I consistently try to make trade-offs. So I would go, CFO, you want me to take 10% out? Happy to do that, but you got to give me something back in return. Can I get another 3% back? In a lot of ways, when you try and help your finance leader understand that these are the trade-offs, in the sense that it's probably reality that we all have to do some cost cutting. So some of the teams are going to have to go, and people will have to go. And the trade-offs sometimes is to take some back so that development can go back into the people that are going to be really stretched during this time and reward them for their loyalty, their tenure, and so forth. And I think when you do a bit more quid pro quo together, everybody wins. But it's never going to be, I'm giving you 10%, can you give me 10% back? I have learned that in my early days. But I do feel like even if I get just some back, I feel like I can do my people who are left behind more justice than actually just consistently cut, and then restart.
Was that for short-term cuts, Lucy? Yes. Is there not a way, though, that you could leverage attrition data, for example, or the impact on removing certain people from the workforce and say, well, we could do this, we could do that, but the impact on productivity and morale would be this. Is there no way you can leverage data to sort of push back and say no?
Sometimes yes, but because they are short-term people, they want to see the return very quickly. And when you look at your apps, yeah, exactly. That's like my day today, right? Yeah, when you look at retention data, and just like earlier we were talking about learning and development data, where they really add value is on a much longer period. You really get to see the trend and the trade-offs in like 12, 24 months. And when you've got a finance leader that says, I need this happen in 6 months, you got to figure a way out.
I often joke that marketing and the chief people officer are kindred spirits, because I too have this conversation and this relationship with CFOs, especially on the investment side. And oftentimes after people, I sit on top of the easiest budget to cut in an organization, for sure, right? My direct spend, that marketing spend. And one of the things that I have found helpful on the marketing side is maybe two things, actually. One is to be as clear as I can about the impact of the decision that's being made, whether it's productivity, whether it's impact on revenue, especially if you're thinking about things like revenue-facing functions, right? Being really clear about the impact that you expect, and not just on something like morale, where they come back and say, okay, I'm not maybe the people advocate that you are. That's not the thing that hits closest to my heart. But to talk about hard metrics like productivity, or to talk about things like impact on the organization's revenue. If we're cutting quota carriers, or we're cutting the people who support the quota carriers, what does that mean for our organization? And then I think the other thing is just, in talking about the what are you giving me back, or can I make an incremental investment? The question I like to ask is like, what would I need to show you as a leading indicator for you to realize that this investment is working, even if you can't see the full impact? And build confidence for additional investment, or not an additional incremental cut or something like that. So think about maybe like leading indicators that you have in your organization or at your fingertips to be able to say, hey, if we invest in more learning and development for the people who stay, or we invest in retention bonuses for the people who stay, maybe we can survey them at different intervals after the action is taken to say, did that make a difference? Did that move the needle? Because then next time it gets built into sort of the basic strategy, or the commonly understood plan for your organization. I love the spreadsheet people. That's what I call them. Other questions? Awesome. Well, I think we're at time. Thank you all for having us today.
Thanks very much.